In a remarkable turn of events, Joe Biden may have finally done something right, maybe. And many Democrats are mad as hell at their own president for doing this, striking the enemy without congressional approval. You see, last night, President Biden announced that U.S. forces coordinated an airstrike against Houthi rebels in Yemen. They also had support from the U.K., Canada, Australia, and Bahrain, among others. He stated, and I quote, "These strikes are in direct response to unprecedented Houthi attacks against international maritime vessels in the Red Sea, including the use of anti-ship ballistic missiles for the first time in history." He continued with this: "These attacks have endangered U.S. personnel, civilian mariners, and our partners, jeopardized trade, and threatened freedom of navigation. More than 50 nations have been affected in 27 attacks on international commercial shipping." Democrats say he violated the Constitution's Article 1 by not coming before Congress before the attack, and that the president's actions could risk involving the U.S. in more foreign conflicts. On the other side of the aisle, some Republicans praising the commander-in-chief. Senator Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, for example, described the show of military force as long overdue, a sentiment, by the way, that I would agree with. Joining me live now to discuss this, the former Deputy National Security Advisor and Vice President of National Security and Foreign Policy for the Heritage Foundation, Victoria Coates. Victoria, good to see you here today.
Good to see you too, Steve.
Look, when we had similar problems, and when I say it's long overdue, I'd like you to address this first. We'll get back to the Democrats having problems with this. When there were similar problems during the tenure of Ronald Reagan in the White House, the problem was stopped quickly because there was a massive show of U.S. force in the area. That those problems came to a quick end. This has been going on for weeks, months, really. And finally, we do something to stop this from happening. Way overdue, I think, is an understatement. What say you?
Well, it's not every day I find myself in agreement with Mitch McConnell, but in this case, I certainly do agree. It should have happened 2 months ago and been much more robust. I think if you look at Operation Praying Mantis, which was President Reagan's operation against Iran, and then you look at the Qasem Soleimani strike under President Trump, these are decisive actions that tell Iran, knock it off. And unfortunately, while the officers and crew of the Eisenhower Carrier Group performed magnificently yesterday, as we can depend upon them to do, this is hardly a brushback pitch. This was attacks on facilities. It was signaled ahead of time, so the Houthi were able to get themselves and a lot of their material moved, I think. And we've already seen activity against our guys in Iraq, so I don't think it's really slowed them down.
Not yet. This has to be a sizable show of force. Look, about 15% of the world's trade moves through that stretch of water every day. 15%. It's a significant portion of world trade. We need to put an end to it. That's why the UK and our other partners stepped up to join us in this effort. I agree with Mitch McConnell, not common for me either. And I finally have to say, well, at least Joe Biden did something right here. But it needs to be a lot more, doesn't it?
Well, I think to be effective, yes. And absolutely, if we think back to the spring of 2021, when the container vessel got stuck in the Suez for 5 days and caused all sorts of nasty snarls and problems that were with us for months, I think that what's building up now as the shipping is increasingly diverted around Africa, will be a similar crisis in coming days and weeks. And, with the big things that go through there are, not just IKEA couches, but food and energy. And so that's where we can look at disruptions in prices for Americans who are already suffering under Bidenomics. So that's not going to be a pretty picture either.
Yeah, we don't want those IKEA couches slowed down. That could be a real crisis here at a few places in America. But all kidding aside, look, finally we did something. But it's just another demonstration to me, Victoria, of our delayed response, a systemic weakness, if you will, in American foreign policy that comes from the president. Anthony Blinken might be the weakest Secretary of State, and that's saying something based on some of the people that have occupied that office. The weakest Secretary of State in my lifetime. John McCain, the late senator from Arizona, said that he didn't even belong in the State Department. He was a danger to America. Boy, was he right about Anthony Blinken. And our foreign policy flows from there, doesn't it?
Well, and again, I don't always find myself in agreement with John McCain either, but I think if you look at the cover of Time magazine this week, there's a big picture of Tony Blinken saying the envoy just about how, wonderful their diplomacy is. It's gobsmacking. I mean, we've got a world literally on fire. We have problems on every continent except for Antarctica, and maybe we could find some if we went down there. So it's a really, really difficult period of time. And I agree the weakness flows from the State Department, but ultimately, Steve, it flows from the White House. This is where the buck stops is with President Biden. And unfortunately, I think he's not in a position to make decisive choices and on behalf of the American people. And that's really what the voting you might have heard about is going to start on Monday. It's been in the paper that they're going to do something out in Iowa. But I think that's going to be one of the great decision points for folks, both in the Republican primary, who they might want to replace Biden, and then ultimately to replace Biden, if Americans are as uncomfortable with this national security policy as I am.
Well, and you mentioned Antarctica in passing, tongue in cheek, but seriously, China believes they own it. Of course, China believes they own everything, and that's another point of weakness for this administration. We don't stand up to the tyrants, whether it's Iran or, well, we finally did a little bit here, but Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iran, China, the list goes on of where weakness is being exploited all around the world because of this White House, because of this president who can't choose what's for lunch, let alone choose a foreign policy to pursue that's effective to keep America safe. Peace through strength is the point, and we're just not there. I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not peace at all costs. It is peace through strength, and then you do need a strong leader to make those decisions. And that's where I think. Oh, and we forgot about Russia and Ukraine, the first land war in Europe in 75 years. So I think this is just an incredibly difficult time, and the president is in a political bind. He can't please his left-wing base by actually taking strong action against Iran. And then you have the rest of the American people who are concerned about the Iranian threat thinking he's not going far enough. So they said he's really in a bind here.
He is in a bind from Gaza to Ukraine and all points around the world. We have not seen a successful policy decision yet. Takes me back to other comments about this president previously. Anyhow, Victoria, always appreciate it. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Steve.
There you have it. All right, coming up after the break, we give you, the viewers, the opportunity to talk to me directly, well, through email. Because really, you are America's voice, and I, for one, want to hear what you have to say. We'll do that after the break. This is America's Voice Live.